Okay, good evening all. I hereby call to order the Santa Fe County Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, July 21st, 2022 at 4 p.m. Can I please have a roll call? Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, guys. Approval of agenda. Vicki, do we have any amendments or tabled withdrawn items?
Mr. Chair, there are no amendments or tabled or withdrawn items on the agenda.
Thank you.
I
Okay.
would move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. Okay, approval of the minutes of June 16, 2022. Do I have any discussion or any motions?
I'll move to approve.
Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Okay, let's go to the consent agenda. Case number 22-3036, Hacienda Dona Andrea Site Development Plan. Do I have any kind of discussion or any motion?
Chairman, I move to approve.
Okay, do we have a second?
I would second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Okay, let's get to the new business. Case number 21-5120, American Tower AT&T Conditional Use Permit and Variance. Mr. Larrañaga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. American Tower AT&T applicant, it's going to be Kim Allen, who's going to be the agent, requests approval of a conditional use permit for a substantial modification as per section 10.17.4.2.1 to replace an existing tower and construct a new 150-foot tower and install new equipment within the leased area. The applicant also requests a variance of section 10.17.3.2.3 to allow the fall zone of the proposed 150-foot tower to be less than 300 feet. The site is within the agricultural ranching zoning district. Table 10-3 allows for a height of 150 feet within the AR zoning district. Appendix B, use matrix, illustrates that a substantial modification within the AR zoning district is a conditional use. The site takes access via U.S. Highway 285, 16 miles north of Klein's Corners, and is located at 51 Bloomer Road, SDA 3, within Section 32, Township 12 North, Range 11 East. The applicant is requesting approval of a conditional use permit to replace an existing 35-foot pole with a new 150-foot pole, installation of the proposed AT&T tower equipment, additional ground equipment, and a generator inside the existing 1,144 square foot wireless telecommunication facility. The applicant also requests a variance of section 10.17.3.2.3 to allow the fall zone of the proposed 150-foot tower to be less than 300 feet and outside the boundaries of the property. The 9,198 acre parcel is zone agricultural ranching. Appendix B of the Sustainable Land Development Code states that a modification of an existing wireless communication facility with substantial changes within the AR zoning district is a conditional use. The applicant states, the proposal is to replace the existing 35-foot tower with a similar tower that is 150 feet. Due to the surrounding area, this is the most consistent tower design given the elevation needs of the carrier. Due to the number of antennas and need for elevation, the current design is the only design capable of meeting carriers' RF needs. The applicant requests a variance of section 10.17.3.2.3 to allow the fall zone of the proposed 150-foot tower to be less than 300 feet, and also to allow the fall zone outside of the boundaries of the property. Clarification of the variances. Building Development Services staff has reviewed the request for a variance to allow the proposed 150-foot monopole to fall outside of the boundaries of the property, and to allow a setback less than a minimum of twice the tower height. The existing 35-foot monopole is set back 74 feet from the adjoining property line. Staff finds that the following facts in regards to the request. The purpose and intent of the SLDC Section 10.17.2 is to ensure that the county's health, safety, and public welfare, environmental features of the county, and the nature and character of the communities and neighborhoods are maintained. Upon further review of this application and the SLDC criteria, staff has determined that a variance to allow a setback less than a minimum of twice the tower height is not applicable for for the proposed development. Section 10.17.3.2.3 states, supporting structures with a tower height of at least 20 feet sited out adjacent to residential property shall be set back a minimum of 100 feet or a distance equal to twice the tower height, whichever is greater, measured from the property line of any property on which a residence is located. Because there are no residences on the adjoining property, this portion of Section 10.17.3.2.3 does not apply to this application. The remaining provisions of Section 10.17.3.2, however, are applicable to this application. The applicant has addressed this CUP criteria, and staff has responded to the applicant's comments. The applicant addressed and staff reviewed the following applicable design standards: access and easements, fire protection, fences and walls, lighting, road design standards, and utilities. The applicant addressed design standards set forth in Chapter 10, Section 10.17 of the SLDC, and staff has responded to the applicant's comments. The applicant has addressed the variance criteria as per SLDC Section 4.9.7.4, and staff has responded to the applicant's comments. The applicant has addressed the variance criteria as per SLDC Section 10.17.13, and staff has responded to the applicant's comments. On April 20th, 2022, this request was presented to the Sustainable Land Development Hearing Officer. Staff provided a report and exhibits to the hearing officer outlining the applicant's request. The applicant testified on behalf of the application. The applicant suggested that revised drawings and an engineering analysis demonstrating and discussing an intentionally designed breakpoint in the tower be submitted to the hearing officer to assist in assessing whether the application satisfies any of the criteria set forth in Section 10.17.3.13. Case number 21-5120, American Tower AT&T Conditional Use Permit and Variance was tabled until such time that the revised drawings and an engineering analysis were submitted to staff. For the reasons stated above, an additional public hearing before the SLDC hearing officer was held on June 9th, 2022 on the application. Staff provided a report and exhibits to the hearing officer outlining the applicant's request. The applicant testified on behalf of the application. The applicant submitted additional documents after the June 9th hearing, which included the following: drop and swap zoning drawings, design appurtenance loading drawings, and engineer's addendum letter. Hearing officer recommendation. On April 20th, 2022 and June 9th, 2022, this request was presented to the Sustainable Land Development Hearing Officer. The hearing officer memorialized findings of fact and conclusions of law in a written order on this request. The hearing officer, based on the evidence presented, recommended that the variance to allow a setback less than a minimum of twice the tower height is not necessary. The variance request to allow the proposed 150-foot monopole to fall outside of the boundaries of the property in the application be denied, and the request for approval of the CUP be approved subject to the conditions recommended by staff. Recommendation on the variance. Staff has reviewed the revised drawings and the engineering analysis which was submitted. Staff agrees that the proposed design may lessen the fall zone, but the fact that the proposed monopole will be 150 feet still allows for a possible fall zone of 150 feet if the proposed design fails. The recommendation of the hearing officer and staff's recommendation is for denial of the request to allow the proposed 150-foot monopole to fall outside of the boundaries of the property. Conditional use permit, Building and Development Services staff has reviewed this project for compliance with pertinent SLDC requirements and has found that the facts presented support the request for a conditional use permit to construct a monopole 150 feet in height. The facility meets the purpose and intent outlined in section 10.17.2 of the SLDC, with the exception of the fall zone being outside of the boundaries of the property. The use structure will not impact adjacent land uses, and the application satisfies the submittal requirements set forth in the SLDC, inclusive of the conditional use criteria set forth in Chapter 4, Section 4.9.6.5. The recommendation of the hearing officer and the staff's recommendation is for approval of the conditional use permit to construct a monopole 150 feet in height within the 1,144 square foot leased area located at 51 Bloomer Road, subject to the following conditions. Mr. Chair, may I enter these conditions into the record?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report and the exhibits listed below are hereby submitted as a part of the hearing record. And Mr. Chair, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Jose. I have a question. Was there any, do you know, was there any dialogue between that property owner on the west as far as discussion for some kind of fall easement or something like that? Did that ever happen or anything like that?
Mr. Chair, that property is state property, state-owned property. I did mention to Arvin, who was representing this project, if he had contacted him as far as an easement, because that's one of our conditions, is for them to get an easement from the state land office. And he just mentioned that they had noticed him as far as the hearings and the neighborhood meetings and everything else, but he did not state that they had had any discussions with the state land office on that.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I can't hear 1 in 7 words.
Yeah. Why don't you repeat that, Jose, a little bit slower?
Okay, I know that the Arvin, who was the agent for this project, I mentioned it to him that if he had contacted the state land office to acquire an easement. That's one of our conditions of approval, is that they would get a easement from the state to allow the property, the tower, to fall 75 feet, 76 feet into that property if it ever falls. He mentioned that they had noticed him for the neighborhood meeting, noticed him for the hearing officer, but no other dialogue had took place between the applicant and the state land office that I know of.
Maybe we could dispense with the microphones, because the sound system is so bad, we can't
Yeah,
hear.
we're not hearing you too good.
Mr. Chair, can you hear better from this mic? Okay, we'll have Jose use this mic.
Thank you.
Good. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the applicant, I had asked the applicant if they had a conversation with or dialogue with the state land office. What they mentioned to me was that they did notice him for a neighborhood meeting and they noticed him for the hearing officer. But as far as I know, they have not had a dialogue as far as getting an easement or having an easement granted for the fall zone.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions of the commission, of staff by the commission? Steve?
Chairman, right along these lines, I noticed in the notes here that the applicant said that because of this FirstNet system that needs to be in place by, I think it was like next April or March, something like that, they would not be able to gain the necessary easement before that time. Am I correct in that? I thought I read that in one of the submittals by the applicant.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, is that in the handouts that I handed out to you? Or in part of the... I know they're on a timeline for FirstNet, but they've had ample time to try to contact the state land office for an easement.
Can you point to a particular page in the handout?
I'm sorry, we didn't.
This timeline you're talking about, where is that in the handout?
That's a timeline presented by the applicant. Application. Assuming. Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I believe that the applicant's ready to speak. They may have that timeline handy.
Okay.
Okay, Frank.
Yeah, I'm puzzled that the recommendation is to deny the variance because it would fall further than the boundary line. How can we approve the use if we're denying the variance?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Katz, they could move the actual monopole 150 feet outside of the leased area, but that would mean getting another leased area from the property owner, the current property owner of that area. The other, and that's why one of our conditions is for them to get an easement from the state land office so that if it does fall, there won't be any buildings or any future buildings in that fall zone.
Shouldn't we come back when that's done?
I'm sorry?
Shouldn't we come back and reconsider this when that's done?
Can I say something before you start? I thought the variance was denied because it wasn't applicable, because it wasn't near residences.
I don't know the answer to that one. Oh, she said the variance wasn't applicable. That's for the setback.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, the applicant had noticed and went forward to the hearing officer for 2 variances, and staff looked at the code, and I thought they would have to go through the other variance of twice the tower height for the fall zone, but that's more in a residential area. And seeing that there's not any residences for miles to this location, staff reanalyzed that criteria, and the hearing officer agreed with us that that particular variance or that section did not apply to this tower. The variance that they're asking for is the tower, I believe, is 74 feet, and it would be falling 76 feet into the state land property.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
thank you, Jose.
Mr. Chairman, basically the question is, have they talked to the state? Is the state happy with this? That's really what the question is. I mean, if I were the state and I had the potential of having a radio tower, however distantly, remotely possible, fall on my property, I guess I'd want to know about it. And has the state been in the conversation with them?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I don't know if they've had a conversation with the state. I do know that they did notice them for their neighborhood meeting, and that had the information, pretty much the information you're seeing here, and they did notice them for the hearing officer. I have not received any letters from the state land office supporting or not supporting this project. So again, the applicant will be on the line here, and they'll be able to answer that question, if they've contacted the state at all.
Okay, JJ?
I think I have several questions on this matter. The tower company has come up with different designs, in order not to try to get an easement from the western boundary. They had a design where the pole would snap at a certain height and not fall onto the other property. They've done a lot of extra work in order to try to avoid getting permission from the adjoining property owner. The adjoining property is the state land office, and usually what they do is they lease that land to some rancher or somebody for grazing. I don't know what the acreage is that the state land office has, but they're in the business of leasing their land in order to generate money for the state, for the education of children in New Mexico. That's what they do. They lease lands. And the thing is, they've gone through a lot of extra work to avoid getting permission. Now, the state land office, they're very responsive, to property owners and to tower companies. All you have to do is ask them permission. And the case I'm familiar with is the state land office asked the lessee a relinquishment of a certain portion where the tower is going to fall. So in this case, it's been around since 2020, I believe, August 2020, when they first made an application for a tower. So this is almost 2 years, and I don't understand why they haven't been able to get permission from the state land office if they have the land, or the lessee that leases the land from the state land office. And I'm kind of inclined, not to approve a project like this until they get their permission from the adjoining property. And I know on the recommendation of the staff is one of the conditions is that they have to get an easement from whoever owns the property, or whoever has the lease on that property, the state land office or a private individual. So I'm kind of concerned that they've been negotiating this for the last 2 years, and then all of a sudden they come up with a deadline where, they have to do something by 2025 or something. So I'm kind of concerned that they have delayed getting easements for this fault zone, and they've also trying to do everything they can to avoid, the tower falling on somebody. They say the towers don't fall, and these towers haven't been around for that long a time. I mean, there's wind events in that area, I think, that could knock anything down. So I'm kind of concerned that they have delayed this project, and I'd like to ask the applicant if they're going to speak today some of these questions. So those are my comments. But thank you.
Thank you, JJ. Okay, well, let's continue with let's start with a presentation from the applicant.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Kim Allen. I'm from the Wireless Policy Group in Issaquah, Washington. And thank you for hearing this matter today. I'm here on behalf of the applicant.
Oh, Ms. Allen, may I
Yes?
swear you in, please?
Certainly.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm your testimony will be the truth?
I do.
And would you state your address for the record, please?
My address is 12979 Lala Cove Lane, Olalla, Washington, 98359.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a PowerPoint that I have put together to kind of walk the commission through the project, and I have been taking note of the questions that you have been asking as well, and I do want to be able to address those. I think the PowerPoint will address some of them, and then certainly at the end we can discuss that. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, so thank you for your attention. Next slide. Next slide, please. And this is just some visuals of what the site is today. That's the existing 35-foot tower. Next slide, please. To be replaced with the tower at 150 feet, which is the height needed for the AT&T deployment and the addition of FirstNet to the tower. Next slide. So AT&T and American Tower, that owns the existing tower, are requesting approval of this tower, which will replace the 35-foot tower. This project is part of the FirstNet partnership that AT&T has with the federal government to provide preemption and priority in its network for first responders. And the state of New Mexico actually requested that this location be included in the FirstNet network as a condition of their opting in to the FirstNet network. And as a condition of the FirstNet contract, this site does have to be on air no later than March 31 of 2023. Next slide. Okay. Next slide, please. And just to orient you with FirstNet, and we'll go through this quickly, and I know you've been given materials. This is a new federally mandated network. AT&T was selected to provide this service. It is a 25-year contract that was awarded to AT&T, and the state of New Mexico has opted in, as well as all other 50 states, 5 territories, and DC. This particular site was identified as an opt-in site by the state of New Mexico, not the state land office, but the state of New Mexico, a different department. So nationwide, we're looking for interoperable broadband network for public safety. And this tower will host band 14, which provides priority and preemption for FirstNet users. And then also priority will be provided on all of the commercial frequencies that AT&T will put on this tower for its regular customers as well. Next slide. So this is just some of the benefits of the FirstNet network. It allows first responders to send and receive data, video, which is important in medical emergencies, as well as disasters, images and text without any concern about network congestion. Next slide. So I know that you heard the presentation by Mr. Larrañaga. The hearing officer and staff have requested a condition of approval that AT&T seek an easement from the owner of the property to the west, which is the state of New Mexico land office, to provide a fall zone for the height of the tower. AT&T, because it entered into the FirstNet contract and it has this deadline imposed, has tried to work with the county to come up with a solution, recognizing that working with the state land office is going to be a lengthy process to obtain an easement. I know that there were questions about the contacts that have been made to the state land office, and I'm not sure that in fact, I don't believe that there has been outreach in terms of obtaining an easement yet. The condition of approval proposed by staff was actually a little bit of a surprise that the easement would be required. And when we went to the hearings officer, we did think that maybe that the breakpoint engineering, which would keep all of the tower on the subject property, would be an acceptable substitute from going through the process of trying to obtain an easement from the state land office of New Mexico. There is a thought, or there at least is a perception on part of AT&T that that's going to be a very lengthy process, and that there was insufficient time to do that. So we did design the tower in such a way that the top 22-foot 10-inch section will basically fold over on itself in the event of an extreme wind emergency. We had, and in this PowerPoint packet, which has been provided to the commission, there are letters from a New Mexico certified engineer who's worked on over 20,000 towers in his career. He was the one that did the design for this. He has never seen a breakpoint engineered tower fail in all the years that he has been working as an engineer. So we, AT&T, proposed this as a replacement for the easement requirement. And we do understand that the county has continuing concerns about safety in the event that property would someday develop. And so we are requesting that the condition be changed to require an easement for the tower length if and when the western parcel ever develops, so the tower can be built now to meet the March 2023 deadline. We do understand that, we would be building at risk in the event that we could not secure an easement. But we do think that, in the future, once that land is subject to some development, which would bring people to that particular location, that we would be able to obtain an easement at that time and satisfy a condition of approval that puts that requirement out in the future, but allows us to construct the tower today. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the diagram up in the left-hand corner is the tower itself and the adjacency to the western property line. And then the diagram on the right side here is the site plan, which shows that the property or that the tower itself is significantly distant from the road, over 700 feet from the road. So there's no impact to the traveling public in the very highly unlikely event that the tower would fall. Next slide. And this is just a snapshot of existing coverage. That radius there with the lighter greens is the gap in coverage. Actually, that's some coverage provided by the existing tower, and the darker blue is definitely coverage that's missing in terms of the traveling public on those roads. Next slide. So this site was selected because it provides good visibility to the north and to the south, which is important for the line of sight tower to function properly. Next slide. So this is the existing coverage in green from the existing site now at 30 feet. And then next slide, please. You can see that the coverage is extended quite a bit. Certainly, the traveling public on the roads to the west of the site are obtaining much more coverage here, as well as along the road to the north and south of 285. Next slide. And just to give you a flavor for the area itself, this is actually, these drone photos were taken from a location that's actually to the east of Highway 285, whereas the site is to the west. But that's where the drone photos were taken from, just to give you a sense of that. Next slide. As you can see, there's virtually no other structure for miles and miles, as the eye can see here. Next slide. And this is the view looking northeast. Next slide. And then this is looking east, directly east. Next slide. And this is looking southeast. Next slide. And this is looking south, directly to the south. Next slide. And then looking southwest, you can see the 35-foot tower is like barely visible, maybe 2/3 of the way across the picture in the center. But it's the only structure for in the vicinity for miles. Next slide. And here the 35-foot tower is visible at the very edge at the far left. Right on the border there. Again, you can see that there's really nothing here for miles. Next slide. And then this is looking northwest. Next slide, please. So as to the engineering of the tower, we did hire a very experienced New Mexico certified PE to do the tower design for us here, to engineer it based on the wind conditions in this area, and this is his attestation as to the strength of the tower and the way it's engineered. Next slide. This is a follow-up letter because the hearings officer had a question about the frequency with which these towers fail. And this particular engineer has been involved and worked on more than 20,000 telecommunication poles. He's had a 20-year career, and he estimated that, in his career, he had seen less than 20 of these poles experience a collapse. Usually it's a structural failure of some sort. And that a tower engineered such as this with a breakpoint, he's never seen a failure of a tower like this. So we have tried to do as much as we can to make sure that the tower is engineered with a breakpoint that will keep the big, larger portion of the tower on the subject property. And then they harden the rest of the length of the tower with additional steel to strengthen it so that it continues to stand in the event of a wind emergency once the wind load has been relieved. Next slide. And this is just illustration showing where the break point, or they call it the point of yield buckle, is on the tower from 2 elevations. You can see just below the antenna array, it's the next notated point there. Next slide. Next slide, please. So AT&T's position is that we have tried to address the county's concerns for safety in the event of high winds by the design of the tower itself. The outcome of this engineering is to keep any portion of the tower from falling outside of the subject property. But we do understand the county's concerns, and AT&T is not against approaching the state of New Mexico land office to obtain an easement. But because of the deadlines imposed by the FirstNet contract, we are asking for that the condition of approval be changed to allow. Actually, I'll read it. That the applicant shall obtain an easement agreement from the New Mexico State Land Office to allow a fall zone within the state property, if and at such time as the parcel to the west of the tower is subject to development. The tower shall be engineered with breakpoint technology designed to keep any portion of the tower from falling on the western property. Because this area is so very remote, and because it is unlikely to develop anytime soon, AT&T requests that the Planning Commission consider moving the requirement to actually obtain the easement sometime into the future, so that we can build the tower and obtain the easement. I noted from Commissioner J.J. Gonzalez's remarks that it in his experience, it's been easy to obtain property entitlement from the state land office, and I hope that's the case. Certainly, AT&T is willing to go forward and do that. They simply didn't anticipate that the condition of approval, when all was said and done, was going to be that we obtain an easement here. But there's no objection to doing that, and with that, I'm happy to stand for questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions of the applicant? Frank?
How close is the boundary from the base of the tower?
It's 22
PowerPoint
feet.
said 22 feet.
About 23 feet. So it's 22 feet, 10 inches is the top portion of the tower. So it's 23 feet.
Okay, and what holds the tower up?
The pole, the monopole, the base of the tower, both the foundation and the monopole.
Are there any like wires that anchor it on this either side or several sides?
No.
It's just
No, we're
pole
not
coming out of
proposing
the ground.
it is with a substantial foundation to it very deep and very wide to hold that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions of the applicant? JJ?
You know, one of the conditions is that you have to get an easement from the westerly property owner. That's what staff recommends. And, you know, you have all these designs, the pole snaps at a certain height so it doesn't fall on the western boundary on another piece of property. Have you talked to the state land office or whoever owns the property there has leased?
We have not. We have not had negotiations with the state land office because we were thinking that, we were hoping that the condition could be altered so that the breakpoint technology could be substituted for the need to go get an easement, given the amount of time it would take to negotiate that easement with the state.
Well, it seems to me you're required to get an easement from the western property owner or whoever leases that, state land office or the lessee. So when are you going to start doing that? You know, I kind of support this project, but you need to get the easement so we don't have any loose ends here. That's important.
Well, and Commissioner Gonzalez, what I'm suggesting and what we're requesting is that that we will get the easement. We would like to be able to delay that until the such time as there's some development around that would threaten, you know, and that would be threatened by a potential tower fall, as unlikely as that is. But if it's the will of the commission for us to begin negotiations with the state land office right away, we would just ask that we be allowed to begin construction of the tower now with the breakpoint technology, knowing that it's undertaking the risk that we may not be granted an easement, although I can't imagine why we wouldn't. It was just a matter of the time perceived to be needed to negotiate such an easement with the state versus the deadline that we were facing. So it isn't an objection to getting an easement. It's that we had a timing issue.
You know, this project has been in the works since 2020. That's the date I first saw on this application. So you've had 2 years before you came to this committee in order to get an approval. Why haven't you been able to get an easement somehow from the western property owner?
Well, with all due respect, Commissioner Gonzalez, we didn't know that we were going to be asked to get an easement until the staff report was published for the hearing just earlier this year that said that the staff was going to be requiring an easement as a condition of approval. So we did not know that that would be a requirement. It's certainly not a requirement under your code.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Frank.
I guess it strikes me that you're in this business and you didn't know you needed easement. You want to do it later, maybe if you get around to it. Why should we believe you? You have not convinced me that you're trustworthy.
Well, I apologize for that, Commissioner. AT&T did not know that there was going to be a condition of approval for this project that they obtain an easement. Typically, in a drop-in swap, which is what this is called, it's usually a very quick process with most jurisdictions, where you go in and the application's approved quickly and you can move forward. And it's typically the path of least resistance, quite frankly, because there's already a tower there. And so when the need for an easement, which is not typical across jurisdictions, this is not a requirement that we see very often, that there be some sort of an easement across adjacent properties for the fall height of the tower. So it was something that we did not anticipate until the conditions of approval came out for the staff report. And since then, knowing how long it could take for negotiations with the state of New Mexico, we thought, okay, we proposed a different solution, which is the breakpoint engineering, which would achieve the same results. And then understanding that staff wanted additional assurances and they thought that they still would want to require the easement. All we're asking is that we build the tower with the breakpoint technology now. And certainly if the commission wants to do a condition of approval that allows us a certain period of time to obtain the easement and come back to the commission or come back to staff, within a year, we'd certainly be happy to do that. It really just was not something that we foresaw earlier.
The break point, what happens at the break point?
the break point is engineered with a buckle on it. So in the event, and only in the event of extreme wind, and I think it's 110, 120 mile an hour wind is what the engineer used as the statistic. Then the top of the tower, which is that big top hat, that's where all the wind load is, folds over on itself. The pole folds at that point, and the tower top hat, where all the antennas are, falls to the ground, or in most cases just hangs there. I mean, because the tower is folded. The remainder of the tower, the bottom 130 feet of the tower, has been hardened with additional steel to withstand winds that are excessive as well. So that portion, as well as foundation, to keep that portion of the tower standing. And with the wind load relieved, then that portion of the tower would not fall. It would just be a pole
I guess
with no wind on the top, with no load on the top.
why wouldn't the antennas, which I assume are what catches the wind, so to speak, if it's still attached, why isn't that pulling the tower over?
Well, all I can say, Commissioner, is that we've not seen that happen. We've not seen it pull the tower over. We've not seen a tower designed like this fall its full length, or even the length from the breakpoint down. And I base that on someone with a degree that's far better than mine in terms of engineering and with a much broader base of experience.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Hold on, I think staff wanted to say something. Vicky?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out, Ms. Allen made the statement that there's an existing tower out there, but the proposed tower is actually 4 times the height of the existing tower. The applicants were made aware prior to the hearing officer meeting that we were going to require them or impose a condition of approval that they would have to get an easement from the state land office. So they've known about this for over 3 months now. And just also wanted to mention that when they came forth, when they come forth to our technical advisory committee meeting, we always tell people that we usually do not support variance requests. So they were aware of the fact that we would likely not support this request.
Thank you, Vicky. Okay, I think Rhea had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the applicant. In looking through the materials submitted for the application, there is an email exchange April 26, 2021, and a gentleman from the Dona group talks about that the surrounding properties are corporations and LLCs. I'm just curious why the state land office, were they contacted? That's my first question, to be part of this neighborhood advisory meeting, required meeting. And then just my own personal dealings with the state land office, they're always very responsive and tend to be pro-development. I'm just curious what type of communications have gone on with the state land office since last year.
And thank you for the question. I know that the state land office was provided notice of these meetings in terms of the community meeting as well as these hearings that we've had, and the state land office didn't choose to intervene one way or the other, either in favor or in opposition. And I previously, again, the only thing that I can say is, in the last 3 months, we've learned that we're going to be required to get an easement for the full height of the tower. This was not something that we knew until the staff report came out for the hearing. And what AT&T is asking is just for some additional time. We are very happy to go and obtain an easement. That's not an issue. We haven't made the contact yet because, frankly, we thought that perhaps the breakpoint engineering would substitute for an easement. But staff has held firm in their resolve to have this, and because there's no immediate danger, even if the tower were to fall to adjacent properties, we're just asking for some time to compromise so that we have time to obtain the easement that the state would, or that the county is requesting. Happy to do it, and we'll open those negotiations right away. On any kind of certainly we need a reasonable amount of time to be able to undergo those negotiations, but we're very happy to obtain an easement. We just need to get the tower on air, and certainly if we were unable to obtain the easement, then we would be at risk of having to take the tower down. So that's the consequence that we're facing. But we're happy to proceed and obtain an easement from the state, and with great hope that the experience of the two commissioners who've spoken to it today about the responsiveness and development friendliness of the state land office will assist us in doing that very quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy?
Yeah, I'm just wondering on the easement. It seems like the purpose of the easement is to provide protection for future development. Is that correct? So in case that the state decides to lease the property or develop it, they should have an easement? Because I've dealt with several of these type of projects, and I've never seen an easement requirement before.
Basically, what I'm thinking is that if the tower was to fall over, once it fell over, it'd be encroaching into the next property. So they need an easement for that encroachment.
But what she's saying is it's not going to go over into the other property based on the engineering studies that they have.
Right, and that's...
And if it did, say it did right now, what would happen? They'd go on state land and take it out. There's no... All the projects that I've dealt with these type of things have been, I don't want to see that in, it's too close to my house. I don't want to see this tower. It's not, I'm worried about it falling over. And especially in an area like this, with the engineering that she has, I just question that requirement.
Thank you. Okay,
Chairman.
I'm going on the row here. Steve's next.
I'd like to refer to a slide that you presented, and in our handout, basically this is the 2 slides of coverage. 133 DMB coverage. One was of the 30-foot tower, one's on the 150-foot tower. You presented that in your slides. I'd like to refer to that. It's
Sure.
in our handout, it's Exhibit 3.
Exhibit 3.
And in this, in this pictures here, basically this is the coverage that is presently being provided, cell coverage, I guess, that's being provided to the existing tower, and cell coverage that's going to be provided in the 150-foot version. Not that one. No.
I think. Next slide.
There.
There you go.
Okay. So first of all, I'm trying to get oriented on here, and one of these is titled Interstate 285. Okay, that's up and down there. What are these other lines? These are other roads. What roads are these? Off to the west.
I believe they're state highways.
Yeah, which ones?
I'm not sure as I sit and look at the map today. And I would want to clarify too that the previous map at 35 feet, which is the existing tower, the only carrier on the tower right now is Verizon. Right. So the previous map is the coverage that AT&T would have at 35 feet versus if it went on the existing tower versus the 150 feet.
Right. Can anybody tell us what this road is? These roads are out here? I'm really interested in this because I'll get to it in a second.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, the one to To the left or to the west would be 41,
Okay,
and the one to the far west is Highway 14.
okay. So this is showing some coverage being provided between 41 and maybe up to Highway 14. What I'm getting at here is, even with the 150-foot tower, there's no cell coverage out to I-40, is there? Ms. Allen?
Not from this site.
Okay.
It may be supplied by a different AT&T facility.
But not by this tower. All right. So I'm wondering, there's not a whole lot out there. I mean, there's not a lot of residential area, there's not a lot of, no towns, there's nothing like that. Why is AT&T going through the expense of building this 150-foot tower?
When AT&T entered into the contract for FirstNet with the federal government, and each state was given a chance to give a list, of areas that they wanted to have covered by FirstNet. And this was one of the areas identified by the state of New Mexico as one of their opt-in sites, that they wanted FirstNet coverage in this vicinity. So that is why AT&T is pursuing this site and has selected this site.
But FirstNet doesn't really provide revenue to AT&T, does it?
Not directly, but it is, I think the FirstNet contract does. I'm not aware of the details of the contract in terms of revenue provided by the federal government for AT&T to provide this network. But it's also part of the public service that they want to do as well, to operate this network. So there is financial compensation. I'm unaware of the details of it.
Okay. Because I mean, when I look at this, and FirstNet's a great thing. I'm all in favor of it. But it's not like it's a revenue. I guess it's not like it's a revenue-producing entity, and yet here we are putting up a cell tower kind of out in the middle of nowhere. You're saying we're doing this because we want to be able to provide FirstNet coverage, which is a wonderful thing. But I'm asking this because, you know, I live over out on Highway 14, out in the country, very well, highly, populated residential area. We can't get cell coverage for crap. You know, AT&T isn't knocking on our door and saying, hey, we want to put a tower up somewhere to give you coverage. And that would be paying customers. Verizon isn't coming to us and saying, we want to put a cell tower up there, provide you guys paying customers. We can't get that happening. We can't get anybody out there to put up cell towers. But yet, here we are, out in the middle of 285. There's no residences around there. It'll provide some coverage up and down 285 for people driving. Won't provide coverage on I-40 for people driving. And AT&T is hot to get this done. That's confusing to me.
Commissioner, it's part of AT&T's obligation under its contract to build this site in this location. Now, to the extent that you have other sites that you've identified that lack adequate coverage near your neighborhood, you know, AT&T welcomes that feedback, and I'd certainly convey that to AT&T because a lot of the network build out is driven by customer input.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. JJ?
Yeah, Ms. Allen, I just had one more question. You know, you're going to remove the existing tower, the 35-foot tower. That's going to be gone, right?
Yes.
Now, how difficult is it to move the new 150-foot monopole like 100 feet to the east? That way you don't have to get an easement from the state land office. Have you figured that? I mean, to me, that's like a simple solution. the cables and stuff, you could extend them to the existing building, which is, you can leave it on site. Explain to me why you can't move the tower like 100 feet or 75 feet in order to eliminate any kind of a variance or any easements from the state land office. Can you explain that to me?
Yes, I can. AT&T, when they were searching for locations, wanted to again, we always try to take the path of least resistance. And so building a tower here on a property that's owned by American Tower Corporation, simply put, their property is not large enough to move the tower that far. We'd have to enter into brand new negotiations with some other landowner, and also then try to see if moving the tower that distance would have any impact on the RF propagation as well. So everything that AT&T needs to deploy is right here on this site. The site's not large enough for us to move it to accommodate the entire setback. That's why we've tried to get some creative solutions here in terms of the engineering, and then also the offer to obtain an easement from the state land office. Now, if that were to be the condition of approving the conditional use permit.
Thank you.
Yeah, JJ, it probably would affect the visual impact as well. I don't know how much because of that 150-foot height. Frank?
Yeah, maybe you can help clear something up for me. You have a contract with FirstNet, and they do towers for first responders. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, the U.S. government, the Department of Commerce, created an entity called FirstNet, the FirstNet Authority. And their charge is to build out a network of towers that will accommodate new and dedicated spectrum called Band 14, which will give first responders priority and preemption in the event of natural and man-made disasters and emergencies. The charge came from Congress frankly, after 9/11. And they want to make sure that the communications network is seamless and that first responders have the highest priority. So the FirstNet Authority looked opened it up to all the carriers for bid, and AT&T was the successful bidder and was awarded the sole contract to actually build out this network over the next 25 years, as well as maintain it. And we were given a deadline of March 31 of 2023 to build the sites that are opt-in sites, the ones that the individual states said, we want you to build this site as a condition of us joining the FirstNet Authority. So that's what this site is. That's why we're under the time pressure here, is because the state of New Mexico asked for this particular site to be built. And we're hoping that because the state land office owns, the adjacent property, if this commission were to require an easement, that we would be able to obtain that. All we ask is that the decision or the requirement to have the easement in hand be delayed, and that we would be allowed to build the site in order to meet our deadline and commitment.
Did I understand you to say earlier that it's the state that wanted the antenna here for first responders? Was it
Yes.
a state-chosen location?
Yes. Not the state land office, but I'm not sure which department or bureau of the state it was. But the state of New Mexico made it a condition of them signing on to the FirstNet project.
It would seem to me that if the state's asking for it, it wouldn't be such a leap to have gone to the state to get the easement, and it shouldn't be that hard.
We're hoping that it isn't. We're hoping that it isn't that hard. As I say, it's a matter of timing, and not being aware that an easement would be required until relatively recently.
Okay, I have a couple of questions myself. One of the questions I have is that tower is going to be so high, how is that going to affect airplane traffic? I think I saw something in the notes about a strobe light that was going to be deleted or not used anymore.
This tower has to be approved and certified by the FAA. And if the FAA determines, they typically don't regulate towers until they're 200 feet tall. And so they don't require lighting on towers that are less than 150 feet unless they're very proximate to an airport within the airport envelope. But this site has been submitted to the FAA and would be subject to any conditions that the FAA would impose as a condition of building it. The FAA would impose its own requirements.
I think on the report to the hearing officer, it was mentioned that the strobe light was not going to be required. Has that been confirmed?
I believe it has. I believe that they confirmed it because the tower is less than 200 feet tall.
Okay, another question I have is, I have concerns about the depth of foundation. I think you have on your foundation, you're showing a 30-inch or 6 inches below frost line. Well, you know, the frost line down in southern New Mexico isn't that deep. So I'm just here curious about that. Do you have any information on that?
Well, what I can tell you is that the foundation engineering will meet all applicable building codes locally, that the foundation was designed by a local engineer, certified by the state of New Mexico, and that it's our assumption based on the expertise that we have hired to design this foundation that it would meet all the building codes. We also would have to be subject to obtaining building permits from the county and be subject to the county's inspection of our designs as well as our build to be able to operate.
Yeah, I just want to say, in my opinion, I think 30 inches for a 150-foot tower is kind of scary to me. Anyways, okay, this is a public hearing. I'm gonna start the public hearing. Is there anybody out there that wants to speak on behalf or against this project? I'm not seeing or hearing anything. What's the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chair.
Wait, hold on. Let me close the public hearing first. So I hereby close the public hearing. Now, what's the pleasure of the commission? Discussion, motion? JJ.
Yes, I had a question of staff. Will they, if we approve this permit today, will they be able to, and without the easement from the state land office, will the county issue a permit to build this tower without an easement?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gonzalez, if the commission would grant the variance for the fall zone to be outside of the property line and approve condition 3 as stated in this, and delete condition 3 as stated in the staff report, yes, we would proceed with a permit for the construction of the tower.
Without the easement from the state land office, or they have to comply with condition 3?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gonzalez, if you would grant that this commission would grant the variance and, deny the variance? If the commission would deny the variance and approve it with condition number 3, then they would have the easement for the fall zone, and the staff would not issue a permit for construction until they would have the easement, proof of easement, from the State Land Office.
You know, I have to get an explanation on Mr. Katz. Would you explain that to me?
From what I took from that is that if we do what I would like to do, and I gather you would like to do, which is simply approve it with the conditions that the hearing officer said, they got to go get the easement from the land office and stop pretending that, oh, it's too hard. And I would recommend that we do that.
Is that a motion?
Mr. Chairman. But to me, the question is, do these things have to happen simultaneously? This obtaining of the easement with the construction? Or do you have to get the easement before you can begin construction?
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Krantz, we would recommend that the easement happen before we issue the permit to allow construction.
Okay.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the commission? Frank?
I'll try. I'm not sure how to do this, though. I would move to follow the hearing officer's recommendation, which I believe means that we deny the variance. We agree to the conditional use permit with the conditions that the hearing officer set forth. All 4 conditions. I don't know whether that covers everything. I'm a little concerned, but I think that's kind of where we want to go.
I think so.
Well,
Okay, is that a motion there, Frank?
well, point of clarification.
Okay.
My understanding is that the applicant applied for a variance. Staff has come back and said, no, you don't need to apply for a variance, and their recommendation is that we disapprove a variance. And then, but that they say that if the variance is not necessary, this can be they are recommending approval of the CUP with the 4 conditions. Is that correct, staff?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, no. Initially, the applicant came in with, and staff analyzed the project through maps that they provided on showing the fall zone and where the exact tower is compared to the distance from the tower itself to the property line. So they came in for 2 variances. One of the variants was it would be 300 feet. The fall radius would have to be 300 feet, twice the tower height. Now, that one, as explained in the first part of the staff report, wasn't necessary for this type of development because it was more for a residential area where there's residences close by where this 150-foot tower could possibly fall on a residence. Since there wasn't any residences, staff analyzed that and stated to the hearing officer that it wasn't necessary. Hearing officer agreed with staff that particular variance was not necessary. The variance that they're asking for was the second variance to fall outside of the property line, boundaries of the property line. So basically, they're falling outside of the distance from the existing tower to the property line of the state land office. State land is 76 feet. So it would be falling. If it would fall completely 150 feet, it'd fall 74 feet into the state land. That's the variance that they're requesting.
That was the variance I was proposing we deny because we want the easement to provide that protection that the variance sort of demands.
But I guess what are we protecting?
I am puzzled that you said that the property line is 74 feet, and then I heard that it was 22 feet earlier, so I am puzzled as to where the property line is.
The property line is 74, I mix up the numbers, but 74, 76 feet. It would fall onto the state property, the remainder of the 150 feet, if the entire pole would fall
Right.
150 feet. With the breaking point at 25 feet, it still would fall, if the design didn't work or maintenance, as the applicant pointed out and the engineer pointed out, if it wasn't maintained and the design wasn't built to design, then the breaking point would take 25 feet, but then the rest of the pole would still fall 50 feet into the state land.
Absolutely.
50 feet to the line, not 50 feet over the line,
Yeah, 50
Right.
feet over the line.
50 feet over the line,
over the line.
yes.
I guess my question is still, why is the easement a requirement? I haven't seen this much discussion for like a cell tower in the middle of a city, where there's an impact. If they put it up next week and it fell over on a state line, what would the harm be at that point? So it seems like, to me, you're making them jump through hoops for, prospective future development.
I guess my feeling to that is that they build it and it's there, and there's no easement, so there's nothing that prevents the state from putting something there or the state from leasing that portion of their land or a much larger portion to somebody who has no idea that there's this issue or this problem, who, puts a caravan out there to watch their sheep or whatever they might do. And to protect against the possibility of harm, you just simply make clear that the state understands that they will not be able to let anyone do anything there, and does so with an easement. And it's just sort of like very straightforward. My reaction seeing this was, God, this is in the boonies. It makes absolutely no difference. They should be doing it. But, it's sort of the combination of, we're doing this for the first responders, the state wants it. We're not doing it for people who might live out there, because no one lives out there. So why is this so hard to get it done in the right way to make sure that it is safe?
I'd also be concerned about if it did fall over, it'd be an encroachment on the property, and let's say something happened and change of staff or something and it had to be cleaned up, the property owner would have to clean it up himself. It could be a possibility.
But again, the state was notified as an adjacent property owner, right, and they did not respond.
We don't know that. We don't have any letters that the state was notified or anything. We don't know that.
Don't they have to be,
That's
don't they have to be notified as an adjacent property owner for a conditional use permit?
Well, the notice probably went out, but as far as the applicant didn't have any dialogue with the state. Frank?
There is one aspect of the notification that I've seen sort of throughout my time on the commission, which is, it's pretty obvious who's most effective. And we sort of require that an applicant will send them notice. But we don't know whether the people read the notice or not. And, when there's a danger for somebody, I would like to have the sense that you call them up and you ask them. It's not that hard if there's a specific person or entity that's involved. We had this case last time where there were, neighbors all around, and it's hard to know who. And I agree with you in that situation. you would say you send them notice, and if they object, then they do it. But when there's like a specific person, a specific entity, a specific owner who it's only that one person, it's going to fall on their land and no one else's land, call them up. Deal with it in a more proactive way.
Mr. Chairman,
Steve?
that's what bothers me in this is I think that the engineering that's being presented makes a lot of sense. All of that is good. But what's missing from this application is any kind of input from the state. That's what's missing. I don't know if the state is in favor of this. I don't know if the state is against this. I would really like to see some sort of input from the state. Again, I don't know if the state would be willing to grant this easement. I don't know if the state would not be willing to grant this easement. I really think there needs to be some sort of information from the state. And question, Mr. Chairman, point of information, is there a motion on the floor?
Yes, I believe there is.
There is. Was it seconded?
I don't think it was second.
Mr. Chair?
I would second that motion,
What?
Frank's motion.
Was what?
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
If,
Vicky?
if I could just interject, just wanted to make 2 points before the motion goes through or the motion is acted upon. So the state land office did receive notice of the request, but it wasn't specific to state that the tower could potentially fall on the state land office property. So they may not have realized that when they did get the notification. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the code actually does state that that the tower would not be able to fall outside of the boundaries of the property. So that being said, even if the commission wishes to impose the condition that the easement be required, I believe the variance would still be required as well because it'll still be falling on the state land office property.
But with the easement, it would change the calculus for granting the variance, wouldn't it?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Member Katz, I believe that would justify a minimal easing of the variance request, but it would still require a variance.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So again, Vicki, you said it would fall outside the property boundary.
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Perard, that's correct.
Okay. So as far as I know, so far we
Mr.
still
Chair,
have,
point of order.
I'm sorry,
I-
we're under discussion over here, the commission. I can't let you speak right now.
Oh, I understand it. Point of order in terms of process. Because the staff has now made a significant change in their position here, and we'd ask for a continuance to be able to respond.
We haven't, we're still discussing our motion.
Okay.
What's the pleasure of the commission?
Did your motion?
We still have a motion floating, I think, right?
I have a question about his motion. Did it include, so your motion is to deny the variance, and it doesn't give them the opportunity to pursue the easement after the conditional use permit is approved?
That's correct. I mean, they can't start building. My understanding is that they can't start building until they have the easement. I guess what we're really doing is conditioning the granting of the variance, because it's still could fall outside, on the easement from the land office, which is what seems to make sense to me.
So point of information, Mr. Chairman. So we have two things in front of us. One is the variance, which staff is recommending not be denied. And then we have the conditional use permit, and that conditional use permit includes the 4 conditions that staff is recommending. So we have 2 motions here, is that correct?
That's correct.
Which motion are we discussing and voting on now?
I believe it was the first one, the variance.
The variance.
Is that correct, Frank?
I guess I'm confused too. I mean, what I thought is that the variance is necessary because the tower is too tall, it would fall on the adjacent property. And the recommendation by the hearing officer was to deny the variance because we have nothing from the adjacent property owner to say, okay, we understand this danger, we will solve the danger by giving you an easement over that area, so we will not, either we or any of our grantors or anyone else, grantees, put anything there. So it would sort of justify granting the variance. And I guess I don't fully understand the conditional use permit. I think it's just sort of saying, okay, you can build, I guess you need to have a conditional use permit to build a tower, and we've made sure that the tower is now going to be safe because it's not going to fall on anyone, so we need to grant the conditional use permit too. And so it's sort of like a combination of granting, I guess it would be granting the variance on the condition that there is an easement from the state. Maybe, is that a better way of expressing it? I think that's kind of what we want to do.
Mr. Chair, Commission members, I believe the intent of the hearing officer, and this is what staff would recommend as well, is that we could support the request for the variance with the condition that they obtain the easement from the state land office.
That's what's confusing to me, is why would there even be a variance if the applicant obtains an easement?
Mr. Chair, Commission members, the SLDC specifically states that the tower cannot fall outside the boundaries of the property.
Even if there's an easement?
It doesn't address the easement factor specifically in the SLDC, but that would, as I mentioned, constitute maybe a minimal easing and mitigate that requirement, mitigate the need for the requirement or for the variance request. So by granting the variance, you would be allowing the tower to fall on the state land office property. But if you impose the condition as stated for the conceptual plan, then they would be required to establish an easement around that fall zone. So it would still be falling on the state land office property, which is why they would require, why the variance is still necessary.
Yeah. Mr. Chair and Commissioners, this is Roger Prusino. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're still in discussion here.
Mr. Chair, that is the Assistant County Attorney on the line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please speak up.
I'm sorry, but I think the last statement made by Vicky states the situation very precisely. The granting of the easement simply suggests that the state land office, being the party granting the easement, essentially is okay with the possibility that the tower may fall on its property, but the granting of the easement does not in any way alter the boundaries of the property. So I think that Vicky's analysis is correct, that knowing that the easement is in place would make it a simpler matter for staff to support the variance rather than recommending against it. But I think that variance would still be necessary because the property where the tower could potentially fall would still be state land office property. It would simply be, as Vicki said, an easier approach because the state land office would be agreeing to grant that easement. It would still be state land office property. The variance probably would still be necessary, but my understanding from Vicki's and Jose's statements were that the staff would be able to support the variance and recommend in favor of the variance if the easement were obtained. Thank you.
So do I understand you correct to say that if I made a motion to approve the conditional use permit with the conditions specified by the hearing officer and grant the variance on the condition that the easement is obtained from the state land office before construction begins? Does that get us where I think gets us legal?
I think that does get you to the point you want to be at. I think recommending or not granting the variance would be problematic. So yes, Commissioner Krantz, I do believe that the way you just phrased it would be appropriate, and at that point your only further consideration, if you choose to make any further consideration, would be the timing of obtaining the easement.
And does the easement, does it have to be that formal of an agreement with the state? Could the state land office send them some sort of, letter? I'm trying to think like not an interagency agreement, but some sort of agreement rather than going through a formal, easement process. I mean, it sounds like, I don't even know if they contacted the state, but having something less formal, more an agreement that the state understands the situation.
That's what we want, is an agreement. And it has to be written because you're talking about land. And so it's called an easement.
Yeah.
It's not that
Yeah.
hard.
Okay.
Okay,
I mean, certainly from a I'm sorry.
Anything else, sir?
Yeah, I was simply going to clarify that something in writing from the state, if it is in writing, signed, but isn't an actual easement agreement, that would still be binding on the state if it includes the right language. And I'm assuming the question was asked to try to address the issue of urgency involved. So it could certainly be a possible resolution to get written assurance from the state that it will grant an easement if, in fact, the actual process of getting that easement would be more time consuming than we realize.
And this is, am I understanding this right, where easement would be like a utility easement, that this gives this company access to this part of the state's property to do maintenance or access? If it's an easement, that's what...
Yeah, I assume that would be included, so if in fact it did fall on the state's land, they could go there and fetch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mr. Chairman,
Steve?
or actually I should be putting this, so let us, even if this property had obtained from the state an easement, even if that were the case, my understanding is, though, that even with that easement, it still would be a variance to allow this, because as the SDLC is presently written, you can't fall into an easement either.
But we would be approving the variance.
Right.
Because the reason
yes.
for the rule is solved the easement.
Yes. Boy. It would really be nice to have this easement in hand.
Yes.
So the other option here would be to table this request until we have an easement in hand.
I mean, we could do that, but I am sensitive to the fact that you'd never know it, but that they're in a rush and that they want to get it done, and that this would get them the approval from us conditioned on their getting the easement from the state land office, which is what we want. And I don't know that I need to hold up things until that's actually done. I mean, what we're saying is we're holding up any granting of a construction permit, as I understand what you're telling us. So they can't build it until they get that easement, but they then don't have to come back to us. That's my only desire to do it this way. I think it might facilitate its actually occurring.
So what would you imagine we would be doing in the future? What would you imagine that we, this group, would be doing in the future?
I don't think that it would come back to us. I think that we would have approved the conditional use permit and granted the variance from the rule on the condition that an easement is granted by the state land office prior to any construction.
Mr. Chair, I
AJ.
think before we consider any other motions, I think we should vote on the motion on the floor.
Or we can either vote on it or unless he wants to withdraw it.
I would like to withdraw it because I think it doesn't get us where we want to be. It simply denies the variance and drags them back in front of us again. And, you know, I don't see the point in doing that if we agree that it's worthy to go forward as long as the easement is in hand.
Vicky?
Mr. Chair, if I could just suggest that maybe we have two separate motions, one on the variance and one on the conditional use permit, just for clarification purposes. If the Planning Commission does want to require the easement, that could be a condition that's imposed on the variance as well.
Thank you.
You're suggesting I make a motion to grant the variance on the condition that the state land office grant an easement to the applicant before any construction begins.
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Katz, if that's what your wishes are to, as far as the motion, I think it would just be clearer to start with the variance, and we can impose the same condition on both if that's the pleasure of the Planning Commission.
I'm sorry, I can't hear with this.
Sorry. If the Planning Commission wishes to impose the condition regarding the easement on both the variance and the conceptual plan,
Yes.
that can be done as well.
Yes, that was my intention. Okay, so I'll make first the motion to grant the variance on the condition that the state land office grant the applicant an easement to cover the area on their property which the tower could fall on prior to any construction beginning.
Would we word that differently, not that we're not requiring the state to grant it, we're requiring the applicant to get the easement from the state, right?
Yes. Okay, we could say they must get the easement from the state, but to get the easement from the state's got to grant it. So I'm not sure that that makes any difference.
Okay, yeah, I mean, to me, it was,
Mr. Chairman,
Steve?
I think we're kind of all in agreement on what we really want to see happen here. But the question is, what is the best way to get there? To me, it seems rather convoluted to have a conditional variance and the cup. I personally would rather see this tabled until you have the easement, and then vote on the variance and the cup.
That would mean they have to come back before us. Correct?
Say that again?
That would mean they have to come back before this body.
Right. We would
Future.
have to- we would,
Table need to come back, so they'd be
Yes.
postponed a month or two.
right.
Okay, so I think we should work one motion at a time.
I made a motion, it hasn't been seconded.
I'll second yours.
Okay, I think, can we do a roll call?
And this is the vote on what?
This is a vote on granting the variance on the condition that the State Land Office grant the applicant an easement for the area in which the antenna could fall, and that this grant of easement is prior to any construction.
And this is the variance.
Right?
Approve?
Approve.
Yes?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
My second motion is to approve the conditional use permit, subject to the conditions, the 4 conditions stated by the hearing officer.
Can I please, you'll get a
I'll second that.
roll call, please?
Approve?
Approve.
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 Approve?
Approved. Okay, we got through that one. Thank you all. Thank you all for the great discussion. Everybody involved. I appreciate it. Okay, let's move to the next case, which is recommendation on ordinance number 2022, an ordinance amending the Sustainable Land Development Code, ordinance number 2016-9, to add a new section 3.6 to establish the extraterritorial land use authority and a new section to 3.7 to establish the extraterritorial land use commission. And I guess my first question is why establish instead of reestablish?
Because we thought it had gone. So this is really a housekeeping ordinance that would create a new section 3.6 and 3.7 of the SLDC. Chapter 3 is where bodies are established, including the Planning Commission. And state statute authorizes the creation of an ALUA and a LUC. An ALUA is an extraterritorial land use authority, and a LUC is an extraterritorial land use commission to exercise concurrent extraterritorial zoning district within 2 miles and plating district within 5 miles. So the county used to have joint city-county boards that would hear zoning cases from the city limits 2 miles out and plating cases from the city limits 5 miles out. When the SLDC was approved, those boards were not included in the SLDC for a couple of reasons. There was previous agreements through an annexation process and a settlement agreement and a JPA with the city that said there are certain areas that the city is going to annex. And during that, they said, okay, well, if you're in the presumptive city limits, which is in the area that we are going to annex, but we haven't yet, all of the zoning and platting and land use issues go to the city. And if you're outside that area, they all go to the county. By not including it in the SLDC, the thing that we forgot about was annexation petitions. So those two bodies would still need to be around to hear any annexation petitions. And there is one additional area off of West Alameda that is in the presumptive city limits, due to be annexed or not annexed, depending upon negotiations now with the city and the county, that these two boards would need to be established to hear. So as a housekeeping, we do need to establish those. Again, they would only hear annexation hearings. And so the ordinance would establish membership and terms. So the ALUA would be some county commissioners, some city councilors. All of the commissioners and councilors would be alternates. For that, the ALUC would be 5 of the Planning Commission and 5 of the City Planning Commission, with the other 2 members of the Planning Commissions being alternates. You would serve for 2-year terms. And again, you would only be called upon if we had an annexation case to hear. And if we do have one, we would be in contact with whoever had agreed to sit on our ALUC board and establish another one of these public hearings to specifically talk about the annexation petition that is in front. And the commissioners and the city councilors would do exactly the same to take your recommendation and make a decision on that. So I would stand for questions, but to summarize, this would be a joint city-county board to hear annexation issues, while we still have the settlement agreement and the JPA that delegates all the other land use authorities to either the city or the county, rather than this joint board. So this joint board at the moment would only do annexations. And I would stand for questions.
Thanks, Penny. I think Frank and I are having flashbacks already. I have one question. Is the city on board already? Do we know?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, yes, I believe that they are. They're going to have to establish and appoint ALUA and ALUC committee members as well. It sounds like from the County Attorney's Office that we would be taking the lead as far as on our side, having the board, the BCC establish who is on the ALUA and appoint planning commissioners for the ALUC, and the City Council would do the same on their end.
So we're ALUC and ALUA instead of EZC and EZA these days.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Frank?
Yeah, as you noticed, my signature is on some of these documents here. I was city attorney at that time, and we were very happy to have worked out the agreement with the county and stopped a whole bunch of lawsuits and said, okay, this is what the city's going to annex, and we're not going to bother you, as I recollect, for 20 years. And, you know, that's like 5 years from now. And so I can understand that this does need to exist to deal with the current situation and annexations. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Any other? Wendy?
How many annexation issues do you have?
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, I would, at the moment, we've got one large area that is to still be questioned as to whether or not it's going to be annexed. And I think that's what the city and the county are having discussions on now. So I'd hope that it would come in as one application of the area that will be annexed and the area that will stay in the county.
Frank?
One other comment. I'd like to congratulate the county. I remember when we were doing this, we were thinking, oh, the city is so wonderful, we do a good job on land use planning, and the county is just terrible, they don't do anything about it. And boy, has that, I don't know whether that was ever true really, but it certainly isn't true now. And I'm just, you know, been so impressed with the good job that the county does with its sustainable land use code and with its process, that the big fear is sort of gone.
Thank
you, Frank. Steve?
Chairman, these commissions would only deal with annexation cases. Is that correct?
That is correct at the moment, while we've still got the JPA and the settlement agreement.
What defines an annexation case?
It would be a case that states whether or not a piece of property that is currently not in the city would be annexed into the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. JJ?
You know, I think I was sitting on one of the committees at one time, about 14 years ago, when they eliminated the 2-mile extraterritorial and the 5-mile, and that's 14 years ago. And what has happened that all of a sudden you bring these committees back? I mean, it seems to more bureaucracy, more work for county staff, more work for city staff, and you have 5 planning commission members and 5 city planning commission members on one committee, and then 4 commissioners and 3 councilmen. I mean, it looks like this is creating a bigger bureaucracy. And then the annexation work, I mean, you know, you haven't had any cases in 14 years. The city just incorporated everything, I-25, 599, Las Vegas Highway, everything. So I just don't see that there's a need for this, although there's a resolution, an ordinance that says, you know, you have to create these committees. Is it really necessary with the workload that we've had over 14 years?
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, yes, this is a required ordinance that we need to do. And if I can just jump back, we used to have, as Chair Gonzalez said, the Easy C and the Easy A, which was the commission and the authority within the 2-mile and 5-mile. So land divisions, rezonings, subdivisions, conditional use permits, special use permits would all come to those committees rather than the Planning Commission. So that is what stopped under the JPA and the settlement agreement, because they looked at the areas that were to be annexed, not had already been annexed, but were to be annexed, and delegated that authority to the city, because eventually it was thought those properties were going to end up in the city, and outside of that area delegated all of that authority to the Planning Commission, which means that we don't have to bring every zoning case, land division case, subdivision case to an Easy C and an Easy A. But as part of that, and as part of the settlement agreement between the city and the county about which areas were going to be annexed, we do need to have an ALUC and ALUA board, because we've got one area that's still presumptive city limits and hasn't actually been annexed. And so that area they need to make a decision on now, and we need those 2 boards in place to be able to make that decision. So I don't believe it would be additional, it would be very many additional hearings. I would hope they can do it in one, maybe it would be several meetings that they have, but who knows what will happen, you know, 5 years, 10 years down the pipe, because the settlement agreement was for a 20-year period, and that 20 years is coming up in about 5 or 6 years, I think.
Well, I kind of like to think that there's boundaries. And within the city limits, you know, they've expanded the city limits a lot, you know, since 2008 when they settled all these lawsuits that they had. And the people that wanted to be in the city, they got themselves in the city. A lot of people that are in the city that were annexed in 2008, they kind of complained because being in the county, they had a lower tax rate, and they were on their own as far as utilities. They got annexed into the city, and their services did not improve that much. I mean, they didn't get sewer, they didn't get water. There's certain services that they didn't qualify for because of terrain and stuff, and yet they're complaining about being taxed at a higher rate. City taxes are higher than county taxes. And I like the fact that the city has their own boundaries, and then the county has the rest. You know, Santa Fe County is a very large county, and I like to be part of the county and not part of the city. If I was going to be annexed into the city, I would have a problem with that. I like my freedom in the county. But thank you.
Thank you, JJ. And I just like to say that you and I have sat on the bodies together, and I just want to say that I think your questions and your comments have gotten a lot better. Okay,
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Steve.
What is the border, what is the range of this? Did I hear 5 miles? 5 miles from the city limits?
State statute allows for platting jurisdiction an extraterritorial boundary from 5 miles outside of the city limits, and it allows a 2-mile boundary outside of the limits, city limits for zoning. But again, the city and the county have a settlement agreement and a JPA delegating the land use authority to either the city or the county. So those 2-mile and 5-mile boundaries at this point are not an issue and are not up for discussion. But there is still an area that during the annexation settlement agreement, an area was identified to be annexed into the city and has yet to be annexed into the city, but it is considered presumptive city limits. So the land use zoning is with the city, but it has yet to be annexed. And these boards are required, so that area can either just be decided to be annexed, and again, this is between the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners. Is it going to be annexed, or is it not going to be annexed? Or is there a different boundary that will be annexed? But without these boards, they can't make that decision. So these boards only allow them to make that decision.
To be blunt, it's a way to get the city and the county to work together.
What would happen if this didn't pass?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What would happen if this didn't pass?
The Planning Commission and the BCC cannot make those decisions themselves as far as annexation, and neither can the City Council. So we would take your recommendation for denial if you recommended that, and we'd take it to the board, and we would let them know that they would need to approve it if they want to have any discussion on annexation.
Frank.
After we entered into the joint powers agreement and settled all of the disputes, there were annexations that occurred, and we didn't have these boards anymore. So how did those annexations occur?
We actually did. We had a 2008 ordinance, I believe, that established a Luke and a Lua, and so we did have that. But when the SLDC came into effect, we forgot to write them in. So we did use them for the previous rounds of annexations. We did have Planning Commission members actually on a Luke, but we forgot to put it in the SLDC. So this is just pulling it into the SLDC.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chair, I believe it is a public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, thank you for reminding me. Okay, I got carried away in the discussion here. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody out there that wants to speak for or against this? Vicky, you getting any hits? Anybody getting any hits on this?
Mr. Chair, we don't see anyone on WebEx.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to close the public hearing and open up for a motion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that they approve this ordinance.
Do I have a second?
I didn't get the motion. Repeat it, Mr. Katz.
Frank, please repeat.
I move that we recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that they approve this ordinance.
That to approve the ordinance? Was that a motion to approve the ordinance?
We can approve the ordinance. The county
We recommend.
commissioners approve the ordinance.
Okay.
We recommend, it was a motion to recommend that they approve it.
I'll second that.
Okay, can we get a roll call? All in favor, say aye. I mean, I got myself. Give me a roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Thank
Next,
you.
next is petitions from the floor. Anybody out there for petitions from the floor? Okay, I don't see anybody out there, so let's go to communication from commission members. I do have something on that. I noticed that last week, Las Campanas put up that cell tower. Right now, to me, it's in the framing stage. I'm not sure if they're using it anymore or not, but what I remember when we approved it, it was going to be like a bell tower type style. And right now, it's kind of like a frame out there. I don't know. I don't see anybody working out there anymore. I don't see any activity out there. So I'm just kind of curious if they're going to try and come back before this body and try and get a variance to leave it as it's built right now. I'm really concerned about that.
Mr. Chair, the permit was issued for that, so they're erecting the monopole, and then afterwards, the contractor will come in and frame it, so it will look like a bell tower. But we will follow up on that, but the permit was issued, and it does display that it's going to be a bell tower.
Okay, yeah, it seems like the framing's already up, and now they just got to start putting the boards on it, the sheeting and stuff on it. So I just want to bring it to your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, communications from the county attorney.
I have no official communications for the commission today. Look forward to seeing you in person next month.
Thank you, sir. Okay, matters from land use staff.
Mr. Chair, we have no items to discuss this evening.
Thank you, Vicky. Okay, our next regular scheduled planning commission meeting is August 18th, 2022, and I would imagine it's on a Thursday. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Second. We're adjourned. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.